Hi everyone and welcome. We're so glad to have you join us today for our webinar on preparing for the PMI Professional in Business Analysis, the PMI-PBA exam. I'm Jill Schuler with Max Technical Training and I'm your moderator today. Today's webinar is the second of a series of 4. Our next webinar will explore the topic, How Business Analysts Provide Value in Today's Work Environment. That will be held on October 21st and we certainly hope you can join us. In a few days following this seminar, you're going to receive an email from Max with links to a recording of today's webinar and the speaker's slide deck. Max is also an annual sponsor for the IIBA Cincinnati and PMI Southwest Ohio. Today's Lunch and Learn is brought to you by Max Technical Training, a premier provider of software and professional skills education for IT and business professionals. Delivering training in top technologies and methodologies for over 17 years, our clients prefer Max because our trainers are highly qualified experts in their subject areas and they can help clients solve real problems as a part of the typical classroom experience. Instruction at Max is not a one-size-fits-all. We develop and deliver modified and customized curriculum and can deliver the training privately on the client's site. We also provide follow-up mentoring, coaching, and consulting for those clients who need that extra boost to transform training into action. We're just about ready to start, and we just have a couple of housekeeping tips here. Laura is going to present for about 45 minutes, and then she's going to take questions. If you do have a question during the presentation, please type it in the questions section found on your GoToWebinar screen. Q&A will be saved for the end. For comments or issues you would like to share with us, you can use the chat section. And remember, today we're recording the session, and we're going to email a link with that information sometime in the next few days with the slide deck. And finally, I am pleased to introduce to you Laura Patton, who holds many certifications including MBA, CBAP, PMP, PMI-PBA, and CSM. Laura has over 30 years of progressive IT experience, 22 years in business analysis, 10 years of IT project management, and 9 years overseeing BA resources, strategy, processes, standards, and tools. Over 9 years as a BA PM instructor at both corporate and collegiate levels, international work with volunteer teams to advance the practice of business analysis, to building standards, practice guides, and develop training and webinars. Most importantly, Laura is a major contributor to both IIBA and PMI. She's been chair of BABOK 3, project manager for IIBA BABOK version 2, BA and PM instructor, and most importantly, she is the lead author and chair of the PMI BA practice guide. And we're thrilled that she is with us, and we're thrilled that you're going to have the opportunity to hear from her today, as well as having her handle the courses that will be coming up in just a couple of weeks. Welcome, Laura, and thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jill. I really appreciate the introduction. And I'm going to tell everybody, while I've done all that work in business analysis, I am not a PowerPoint master. So, Jill, I do apologize. It looked like some of the timing is still off on the slides. So for those that are tuning into this webinar, I'll take full responsibility for that. If we jump ahead, I'm just going to jump back to the slide that we're discussing. And hopefully that just keeps you awake, so it's an added bonus. But thank you, Jill, very much for that, and I apologize on the slides. So we have a lot to cover, and I'm really excited to be here today. It's my first webinar with you guys, and I'm delighted to be asked to present it today. So let's just jump into the details right away and go over and look at our agenda, what we're going to cover, and we'll jump into the material. So first off, at the top, we're going to talk about why is PMI talking about business analysis. So I hear that question a lot, so you guys might have that question as well, so let's just get that answered. And then we're going to talk about PMI's products and services in business analysis. As you prepare, if you're interested in taking the credential, the PMI-PBA, you're going to want to know what materials are out there to prepare, so we'll talk about that and where you can get access to those materials. Then we'll dig into the details of the PMI-PBA exam, including the eligibility requirements. And we'll talk about your preparation for the exam, including the possibility the PMI-PBA prep course that is now available for you to take if that's an avenue that you wish to explore in your training. So that's our agenda for today. So let's go ahead and first answer the question, why is PMI addressing business analysis? So I don't know about you, but I've gone to a lot of chapter events and I've seen a lot of presentations over the years, and I have seen the Standish reports, the chaos report specifically, where we tie in business analysis practices, requirements management, and the relationship to project success, right? So we've seen that over the years. Last year, PMI did their own extensive research, and they went ahead and conducted the research and then published their Pulse of the Profession report. So I want to go over some of those statistics because they're quite alarming and shocking. And all of that information, I'm only going to touch on some of the highlights, but if you're interested in more of the details, you can get access to that Pulse of the Profession report. It's from last year. It's available from PMI's website for download, and it was published in August of 2014. So some of the information that came out from the research is that 51% of projects are finishing within their allotted time frames. So that's only a little bit over half of our projects are meeting anticipated schedules, which is alarming. 55% of completed projects are coming in within their initial budgets. So between those two statistics, it gets project managers, very nervous. And then we also found from this research that 64% of projects are successfully meeting their original goals and business intent. So it starts to sound like, wow, maybe we're not doing some things that we should be doing, right? Like, isn't the business analyst completely responsible for working with the stakeholders up front and documenting the business needs and identifying the problems or opportunities that project's to fulfill? But we're seeing these type of numbers. And additionally, the research came back and told us that 16% of projects are deemed failures at the start of the project. So those are really pretty bad numbers. And they get even worse when you overlay it to look at the dollars behind what the data is showing us. So in this research, PMI told us that for every dollar that's spent on a program or a project, we're seeing about 5.1% is wasted, and waste is attributed to poor requirements or business analysis practices. Now that doesn't sound like a really high number, but when you look at it from an overall perspective, that equated to $51 million for every $1 billion spent, and that's astronomical. That's incredible. If we could do good business analysis on our projects, just think of the money that could be spent across the board. Additionally, in that research, what came out was that the companies that are working to provide information in this research, they already felt like requirements was a big problem in 2013. And then the data is accumulated in 2014 with additional research, and it went up 5%. Companies are feeling that the requirements, elicitation, and business analysis processes are the cause of why their projects are failing. So an uptick of 5% over the course of 1 year, and all of this astounding information pretty much answers the reason why PMI is concerned about business analysis. And we also know, those of us that work in the industry, that when we see business analysis done well, we have a lot of tangible benefits that we get from a good process. So on this particular slide, all I wanted to point out, because I know you're going to get a copy of the deck, this is just another research report from IAG Consulting. I won't read it in detail, I just put it here for informational, but we basically have IAG's results, we have the Standish Group, we have PMI, all of the research is telling us the same thing. So in the end, what do we say? The project manager and the business analyst, we really are all working in the same direction. We have the same goals. Our stakeholders have the same goals, and our executive leaders have the same goals, right? But these roles are super critical for the success of the project. So we call those out, and this really tells us that, PMI is serious about helping their constituents be better at project success. And so, this is exactly why we're talking business analysis. So kind of got ahead of myself with my thought. So on this particular slide, what I wanted to point out is the opposite of all that data we know. Project failure, there's a relationship to bad business analysis and BA processes. But when we do have a good process, when we run an effective BA process, we see the opposite. And there are a lot of value propositions that come out of putting together an effective business analysis process. I'm only highlighting a couple here. But on our projects, when we do look at them and we have an effective process, we see that the products and the services that come out of those projects meet the stakeholder needs. Our stakeholders are excited, all right? Our engagement, our surveys tell us that. Our engagement scores tell us that. We also see that we have a more engaged project team. Now, how is that possible? Well, it's possible because when you're on a failing project, people are stressed. There's rework. People are not happy with the product that's being produced. There's teams probably fighting amongst each other. So it's a level of not a fun place to be, right? So we find that when we have an effective business analysis process, our project teams are happier. We also see that when we invest in business analysis, we have a higher probability, the opposite of what our research tells us, a higher probability of delivering on time and within scope and budget. And our solutions deliver higher business value. If we don't do business analysis, or if we don't do it well, we're delivering solutions that we don't even know are the best or the most optimal. But as a business analyst, we know that we work very well upfront with our stakeholders to identify the problem or opportunity, define the business need, gather the business requirements, and then we work all the tactical project stuff after that. So that's really important to keep in mind. And the last point I put here, because I think it's also important for people to realize, when you do really well at business analysis, that is something that you don't invest in once and then it's done for a project. You're actually developing a process that you can pick up and take to the next project. So you have reusable, tangible assets that you can take onto project B, project C, project D. So the process is repeatable, as well as the competencies of the BAs continue to improve over time. So, you know, hopefully these ideas are items you can take back to your work environment if you find yourself in kind of a grassroots effort having to champion the role of the business analyst. So these are some of my favorite points to point out when I'm trying to do the value proposition behind what we do. Okay, so let's talk about the products and services that PMI has put out in the industry to help business analysis and business analysts and projects that need to do better in that space. I think it's important to emphasize this area before we just jump into talking about a prep course, because the PMI-PBA has multitudes of different ways that you as a practitioner can prepare for it. So I'm hoping that these slides help you find that additional information. Before getting into what are the items out there, I wanted to also address another question that I have people ask of me, because they think that this business analysis speak in the PMI space only started last year. But I wanted to point out that PMI has always recognized the importance of requirements management and business analysis. Going back to the 4th edition of the PMBOK, where we talked about the collect requirements process, that was new to the 4th edition. So that content was added, highlighting the importance of getting the requirements right for project success. And then we moved another iteration into 5th edition of the PMBOK, and with that version, we saw an entire new knowledge area added to the PMBOK, where we covered stakeholder management. And that's all the work that has to do with making sure we identify our stakeholders, the techniques to do that, making sure we understand them, their characteristics, analyzing them, and then managing them, because they're such an important point or input into our requirements process. So I just wanted to point out that, if that helps to answer a second question that people have. And then let's go on to 2014. So we already talked about the Pulse of the Profession report, and the link is here at the bottom of the slide if you're interested in going to the website. This link will take you to 2 areas where you can get to the Pulse of the Profession report. In addition, which we're here to talk about the PMI-PBA, but PMI launched that last year. So that credential came out. We'll talk about that in detail, but as far as its launch last year, the credential was really established to say, hey, if there's a way that we can offer a credential to identify those that specialize in business analysis, that's a great way for companies, for project teams to pull out those experienced professionals that practice business analysis who are really good at what they do, and they can bring them onto their project teams and make improvements in the requirements in business analysis space. So PMI launched the credential. In addition to that last year, you started to see, if you've been to the PMI website, from last year across the different months, that PMI is continuing to put a lot of assets out there on their website available to help with the business analysis problem, the lack of good business analysis. So you'll see webinars and podcasts and white papers available now for download, and that continues to grow month by month. In addition to that, projectmanagement.com, which is also owned by PMI, they added a whole community focused on business analysis. So I wanted to point that out as well. So as you're on your journey to prepare for a certification, or if you're just think certification is a few years away, but you're wanting to continue to improve your competencies, these are places you can go that PMI has really taken serious the problems that came out of that Pulse of the Profession report. So they're putting materials and linking practitioners to content and to experts to help them solve the problem of bad business analysis or requirements on projects. Okay, so hopefully this is informative there from what happened last year. Now, what happened this year? Well, something really, really major happened this year. PMI published their very first standard, completely focused on business analysis. There's a picture of what it looks like. You can get access to that from the PMI website. You can purchase it from local retailers, online retailers. It's called the Business Analysis for Practitioners, a Practice Guide. So it's been out, what are we now, about 9 months or so, and it has been very, very well received by the community. It's a great guide to help you prepare for the PMI-PBA. It's also been well received because people like the tone. It's very easy to follow, it's practical, there's examples, it's spoken in a really good tone that's not very academic, so it's doing well from that space. In addition to what else happened in 2015, PMI formed a relationship with BA Times. So that's another website that provides and serves up contents for business analysts and project managers. So if you go to BA Times, if you're a user of that community, you'll see that PMI now has a tab on that website where the frequent communications that needs to get out from PMI on business analysis is served up there. In addition to that, PMI is continuing to sponsor articles and webinars and stuff in that arena. So that's where we're at as far as what can help you on your journey. I'm going to hand it back to Jill because I think we have a polling question we want to get to before I move on.
Yes, we do. Here it is. Which is the most important factor when determining whether to pursue a professional certification? So please select one, and we're going to keep the poll open until we get everyone's response in a few seconds. We're at 48%. And keep going. Keep going. We're almost there. We have 80% voting, and we're going to be closing the poll in 10 seconds. And we're closed. Okay, so here's the results, and Laura, if you want to take a look at the results of what people thought, there you go.
Could you read me the result? What came in number one? My view is a little small to read for my view.
Okay. 50% said the reputation of the organization providing the credential. B, cost of the certification was at 11% of our respondents. C, employers' recognition of your credential was 39%. And the last two, ease of obtaining the certification and other, were at 0%.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So that tells me we have some work to do in the area of showing the value proposition. I'm going with the 39%, showing the value proposition to employers. So that is something that I'll take very serious and continue to go out and speak to companies and to hope that we can turn them on to different webinars and trainings, because I think that's really important. I always like the grassroots effort, but so much powerful if those of us that are helping to develop the standards or working in the industry for many decades can come in and talk to organizations about the value. And some of these upfront slides that we went over are some of the really key talking points. So thank you. That was really helpful to see. All right, so let's go on to talk about the exam, because I'm sure you're all very excited about that. So what does it stand for? It stands for the PMI Professional in Business Analysis. And as I mentioned, it's a credential to help you stand out from your peers. If you're a business analysis professional, it is an experience-based exam, so it's not just based on rote memorization of some topics or definitions. The application process actually has you demonstrate that you have this experience. So that works out really well, because just the fact that somebody has been eligible to sit for the exam tells something about that person. So it helps to bring those that practice the business analysis together with those that have the needs. So it recognizes and validates that expertise. We're going to get into the details of what is covered in the exam, but basically know that it covers 5 domains, which are groupings of tasks that discuss the work of business analysis, and it also looks at the skills and different competencies. And as we mentioned, it launched last year. It was first piloted and then launched. So a little bit about the development of the exam, because another comment that I hear from people is, well, what does PMI know about business analysis, and how good could the certification really be if a bunch of project managers developed it? Well, that's not the case at all. There was extensive research that was done after or about the time that, well, I don't actually know the timing of the research, but PMI is great at doing research. So there was the research that went into the pulse profession. There was extensive research that went into where an outside company was contracted to do the role delineation study. Anytime you have a credential that's of any merit, there is a study, there could be a study, that can be done by third parties to go out and really survey and collect data and do all this research about what is business analysis. So there was an extensive role delineation study, and then there was all the people that PMI assembled. We have subject matter experts across industries, a lot of different years of decades of experience, leaders, thought leaders, practitioners, and it didn't matter on role. If you were a system analyst, a requirements engineer, systems engineer, if they went out and scoured and got the best of the best. And so those folks came together along using the information from the role delineation study, and that's how the certification was built. So where the research had any areas that needed to be validated, this group of SMEs played a very important role, and then they were the team that helped develop it. So if you hear people saying, what do PMs know about developing a certification for business analysis, now you know the real truth. So what about the exam? Well, it's 200 multiple choice questions. 25 of those questions are called pre-test questions, and they're used by PMI to kind of gauge future test questions, so they're out there as kind of validating possible questions that might come into the mix later. Of the 25 pre-test questions, they're not scored. So your score is based on 175 questions. Now, you won't know what are the pre-test questions, so not even to focus on that. Don't worry about it. They're just all mixed in. And there is a very large test bank. So there's questions all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of questions. No two people sitting next to each other or in the office are going to get the same exam. So it's really very well thought out, and there's a lot of content, but you're going to get 200 questions to answer in your exam. You get 4 hours to complete it, and aside from that 4 hours, there's 15 minutes in the front where you're going to do a tutorial if you want to get comfortable with the testing environment, and 15 minutes in the back where you can do a survey. Now both of those are optional, so you're not required to do those. If you do them and would take the whole 15 minutes, then you're basically looking at about 4.5 hours in the testing center. But you're not obligated, so basically 4 core hours to take the exam. So I talked about the role delineation study. One of the outputs that come from that is the idea of having a blueprint for the exam. So the number of test questions are basically given this level of emphasis on the exam, which is really important because you wouldn't want to go take a certification exam that we all know that BAs spend about 10% of their time doing evaluation. You wouldn't want to see 75 questions on that part of that particular domain. So this is the exam blueprint, and that's kind of how the question distribution is rolled out on the certification. Now, there's 2 different ways that exams are administered. They're administered either computer-based testing or paper-based. Now, few people will have an opportunity to do paper-based testing. There's only a few criteria that come into play when that might happen. If you work for a corporation who is going to have a group of business analysts certify, that corporation, if they're a corporate sponsor, can work with PMI to administer a paper-based exam. If that's not the case, the second condition is if you live far away from a testing center. Now, PMI has contracted with Prometric, and there's a lot of Prometric centers all over the world. But if you're in a remote area and you're at least 186.5 miles from a test center, if you demonstrate that, then you can work with PMI to have a paper-based exam administered for yourself. Now, people say that's a really odd number, 186.5. That's just basically because that's the conversion into miles. It's really 300 kilometers. This is an exam that's rolled out across the world. Most people look to use kilometers. So that's where the 186.5 came from. The rest of the people that don't fall under this criteria are going to take a computer-based test. Okay, so it's going to be administered in the Prometric Testing Center. So how much does it cost to take a certification? Well, there's 2 conditions that determine your price, whether you're a PMI member or not, and whether you are taking the CBT, the computer-based or the paper-based exam. All right, and so those are the fee, that's the fee schedule there. So you can basically, the way you'd read this, if you're going to take the computer-based test and you're a member, you're looking at $405. All right, you can see substantially more for non-members. So what most people do is they go ahead and just become a PMI member because of all the other benefits, and then they get the discount on the credential and being able to apply for the credential. I did want to throw out the fact that this credential has a recertification process. It's not anything you have to worry about up front. You just need to know that it exists, because there's an investment after you get your credential to make sure that you come back every year and demonstrate that you're continuing to professionally develop. So we won't get into the details of this. There is a handbook you can download from the PMI-PBA website on pmi.org where a lot of these further details are elaborated for you. But I did want you to realize there is a recertification process. Just it helps to ensure the integrity of the certification, because if people just tested once and passed it and then had the thing for 10 years and never went back and tidied up their skills or didn't learn new ways or techniques, then certification really wouldn't be that valuable to employers, right? So there is a recertification process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about eligibility. How does that work? Basically, there's 4 criteria. There's 4 areas when you apply online. There's an online application. You have to go through and demonstrate areas of experience in these areas, broken out by educational, business analysis, general, project, and BA training. And let's just talk about the details there. So when you're filling out your application, you have to talk about your educational experience. So minimally, you have to have a high school diploma or equivalent. higher education, if you have an advanced degree, it will reduce the amount of BA experience you need to demonstrate on your application, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here's an example. If I have a high school diploma or a 2-year degree or some global equivalent of that, on my application I have to show that I've acquired at least 7,500 hours of experience working as a business analyst. I don't have to have the title. I have to have been doing business analysis things, right? And if you want to know what those things are, pick up a copy of the practice guide. So am I writing business cases? Am I doing elicitation? Am I doing documentation, right? Those things. So you need to go back into your history of the different projects that you worked on, and you need to start assembling that information. Now the good thing is it's online, so it's real easy to put the information in and save as you go through. All right, but 7,500 hours, about 5 years of experience. Now once you have, if you have a bachelor's degree or higher or some global equivalent, you can see that the number of hours drops down pretty rapidly to 4,500 hours. So instead of demonstrating 5 years of BA experience, I only have to demonstrate 3. So a quick example of this, because there's a term in the handbook that might be a little confusing, and it's called non-overlapping activities. And so what that means is as you're filling out your application, you have to make sure that your experience is, well, it's okay if it overlaps, but you can't count it twice. And so as an example, if you worked on 2 projects, and I'm just calling them Project A and B, and one started at the beginning of January and ended at the end of March, and the other one started at the beginning of March and ended at the end of May, is that 5 months or 6 months, right? So non-overlapping means that I can't double dip for March, because you see Project A and B are both going on at the same time. And that's simply because obviously you can't be doing both projects at the same time. At the end of the day, you're still probably 8 hours, 9 hours of time, right? And even at that, be careful, because we all know that we don't get to work 8 hours on a project in any one day. We have meetings, administration, lunch hours, and things like that. So keep that in mind as you're assembling your information to demonstrate your BA experience. And that's just kind of, with an example, demonstrates what we mean by non-overlapping activities. Now, from a general project experience, okay, that was BA experience. Now PMI wants to know, how many hours have you worked on projects? And there's a requirement. You have to demonstrate at least 2,000 hours working on a project team. Doesn't matter what role that you held. Most of the time you probably held a BA or business analysis responsibility, but even if you were a project manager, you can count those hours. Okay, the project experience can include some of the hours or any of the hours that you demonstrated in the BA portion of the application. So if all of that time occurred on projects and programs, all of your BA work, well then you have this one nailed. But if you did a lot of business analysis, like we have process analysts, we might have strategy people doing business analysis, if they weren't allocated to a project, then you have to demonstrate to get to the 2,000 metric. Okay, one thing that's really cool about this, and I benefited from this because I had a PMP credential, is I didn't have to demonstrate the project experience. So PMI says if you hold the PMP or the PGMP, which is your credential for program management, if you have either one of those, then you're exempt on your application from having to demonstrate the project experience. Okay, same thing, non-overlapping, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this slide, but we already know the definition of non-overlapping, and so the same thing applies here for demonstrating project experience. Then we get to the last criteria, which is our BA training, and what does that mean? Well, another bit of information that the application is going to require you to put in is how much business analysis training have you acquired, and you need to demonstrate at least 35 direct contact hours, okay? So direct hours, this means, definition of direct contact means that it's not self-directing. It's not picking up a book and reading about business analysis. It's you actually engaged in a class, okay? So the training could be an employer or company-sponsored program. It could be from a registered education provider like MaxTrain. It can be some type of training from a university or college. What you're not going to be able to count is if you attended a chapter meeting or, like I said, any self-directed learning. But it's only 35 hours. And the cool thing about this is there isn't any time constraint on it. I mean, you do have to have the training completed before you apply, but you can go back forever. You can go back to something you took 5, 7, 10 years ago and count those hours. So most people don't have a problem at all showing that they've, along the way, had some direct contact hours in business analysis. So this table will be in the slide deck, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but this shows the different scenarios and the paths through your eligibility. So I just kind of consolidated what we just talked about in the past slides, and I'm demonstrating it now in a table. So you're either on the first row or the second row based on your educational background, and then you either because of that, have to demonstrate the 75 or the 4,500 hours. And then from there, demonstrate your project experience. And then regardless of educational background, everybody demonstrates the 35 hours of BA experience. Okay? Oh, one important thing I did not mention. So of the project experience and the BA experience, you can't go back any more than 8 years. So keep that in mind. Okay, so if you did project work 9 years ago, don't even put it on the application because it won't count. Now, another question I have is a lot of people want to know, well, how is this certification different than the CBAP? And the CBAP is the other certification that is known in the industry, and International Institute of Business Analysis has put out that one. PMI has put out the PMI-PBA, and basically I want to show that it covers the same stuff. Business analysis is business analysis. Okay, so you can compare the different sections of the standards, if you will. So in the IIBA world, when we're studying for the CBAP, we have knowledge areas. When we're talking about the PMI-PBA, we're looking at the practice guide, we're talking about domains. At the end of the day, the stuff's not in conflict. They're talking about the same types of business analysis tasks. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits to focusing and getting the PMI-PBA, but ultimately you as the consumer, you need to make that decision. Okay, I also included this chart kind of looking at the requirements across the credentials. The two that are more closely, because IBA also has a more junior BA certification called the CCBA. But if we just looked at the CBAP and the PMI-PBA, you can see that you're demonstrating 7,500 hours in both of those, okay? Both of them require at least a high school degree. But with the PMI-PBA, if you have a more advanced degree, starting at bachelor's, you can demonstrate less hours, which is a big win for people. Because if you have a 4-year degree, you only have to demonstrate 4,500 hours. All right? There is a code of conduct. It's just a piece of paper. You read it, you sign it. You have to do that regardless of which certification you go after. The difference, and both of them do have a recertification process. So that's not a differentiator. You do have to have a professional or 2 professional references. With the CBAP, you do not have to do any, you don't have to have anybody fill out a form on your behalf or write in on your behalf to be eligible for the PMI-PBA. Okay, so let's talk about preparing. I am just going through my notes here. Okay. Multiple ways to get started, all right? I would urge you heavily to go through the PMI-PBA handbook. You can download it off the PMI website, look it over, and it's really ultimately up to you to assess your eligibility, okay? If you feel you're eligible, then go ahead and fill out the online application, okay? Go ahead and make payment, and then once you do, you can start preparing for the exam, okay? It takes only 5 days to hear back from PMI, roughly about 5 days. It's not a long time, all right? And then go ahead and move forward and start. You do not schedule your exam unless you get your approval letter from PMI, though. That's really important. Give yourself, once you get approved, though, you get the approval letter from PMI, you have up to a year to take the exam, all right? So we talked a little bit about the application process. Just know that it is online. You don't have to do it in one sitting, so you can save as you go, which is a really big benefit. People really like that. Um, Again, the turnaround time is wonderful. There is an audit process. Don't worry about it. It's randomly generated. Not everybody gets audited. A small percentage of applications get audited, and that's just to ensure the I don't know, what do you say, the integrity of it. And if you get audited, it's not a big deal. You get 90 days to turn around your paperwork, and all PMI wants to see is that you can show proof that you worked on the projects that you did, okay? Once you're approved, you can take the exam up to 3 times. You get some good feedback at the end of the exam based on your score to see your weaker areas, and you can use that to prepare for the second time around. I don't know anybody that's, so far, I don't know anybody that's had to take it 3 times, but you can take it up to 3 times in 1 year, okay? Your certification cycle does start the day you pass. So remember that recertification process, that kicks in once you get your, hey, you're now a PMI-PBA. So keep that in mind too. You don't want to lose your credential just because you lost track of the time. All right? So how to prepare? Well, we talked about the body of, there is no body of knowledge, but we talked about the practice guide. So you can get a copy of that. And at the beginning of this webinar, we went through all of the reference lists of what is out there. Okay, we're going to talk about the prep class. Only a few slides on that, but I think we have one more poll. I'm going to hand it back to you, Jill.
Great, we're ready.
Okay.
And which approach is most effective to prepare for the exam? So we're waiting for everyone to respond. We've got 30%. Wow, 45. You guys are quick. How many? 90%. 90%. Awesome.
Oh, good.
10 seconds, and hopefully we'll get everybody. Okay, we're going to close, and then here are the results. Okay, so what we have here, Laura, is A, self-study at 16%, B, group study free through other PBA practitioners, 21%, C, study group, 11%, and D, a prep course at 53%.
Wow. Okay. That is amazing. So I too took the prep route because I think it's quick and you can collaborate with your group and you can get it done as opposed to dragging it on. But there's all sorts of techniques out there for different people. So let's talk about that real quick and then we'll wrap up and let you guys ask some questions. So the next thing I did want to talk about was a up and coming prep class. Before I get to that though, this particular reference materials slide, you actually can get to the reference materials from the PMI-PBA web page. It's a link. You open it up. You can see the practice guide isn't listed there. It's just launched. It soon will be. But when the credential was built by the team of the subject matter experts, there's a list of books here that they read, reviewed, and considered content from when they assembled the exam. So take a look at the reference material because the exam's not 100% based on any one thing, right? So I wanted to bring awareness to that. I talked about this releasing this year, so if you're interested in getting certified, go ahead and get a copy of this. It is a PMI standard even though it's not a body of knowledge. All right, so keep that in mind. The role delineation study, I just quickly mentioned that it had that exam blueprint up front where it talked about domain names, needs assessment, and I wanted to just point out that when we wrote the business analysis practice guide, we followed those names as closely as we could because we also leveraged that RD study. We changed a couple. Like we felt it was more informative to say business analysis planning, and we felt it was more informative to say solution evaluation. But the point is that the practice guide is very closely aligned to all the research that PMI did. Now, there is a prep course that we've been touting about. Max Train will tell you about that coming up. I don't need to read through these slides verbatim. They will be in your deck. But what I wanted to tell you about who it's targeted to, and then there's a slide for every domain that's covered in the prep class that you can read at your leisure. So the prep course is, really targeted to anybody interested in getting more information about the PMI-PBA. If you're a certification prospect, go ahead and take the prep course because it's a real jump in to see how ready you might be, because don't forget it's experience-based. So you're going to pull from your knowledge over the years, and it's not all book smart, right? If you want to learn more about the PMI-PBA, great class to take. If you're a CBAP already, or have another credential from PMI, you're considering, moving from project management to business analysis because you've had that hybrid role. Great class for you, okay? So I just want to emphasize, though, it's going to get you prepared for taking the exam. It's going to assess your readiness. You're going to go through all the material in the next couple slides that are in here. We won't talk about, but they're in there for your reading pleasure later on. But you're not going to learn the concepts. We're not going to sit there and talk about facilitation. We're not going to write use cases. It's experience-based, and at this point we want to focus on helping you prepare for the exam. So keep that in mind. All right, we're going to highlight key concepts and definitions, but we're not going to teach the principles. All right, and so the other slides, oh, I guess I should mention this. What is out of scope is the teaching. I did talk about that, but we want you to walk away really being able to leverage what you have learned from work experience, but there will be some terms that maybe you're not familiar with. We will get into that. That part's not out of scope because you highlight your areas of weakness. So we do bring through the key concepts, but we're not teaching. So I think that's really important for you to know. All right, I won't talk about these slides because I really want to hear from you and I want to get your questions, but there is a slide in your deck for every single domain that explains what the domain is. And so if you're interested in the credential, each of these domains are explained for you in detail. I mean, here it's kind of a definition of what is covered in the prep class. Okay? Okay, so what did we talk about? There was a lot. We talked about the PMI-PBA in detail and what it takes to qualify to apply, but it is gaining momentum. I didn't mention that. As well as the practice guide is doing, the PMI-PBA is doing really well equally. And PMI is just a well-known entity to organizations. So a lot of organizations, because they require their PMs to have PMP, this is getting the attention of them, right? Especially when we look at the statistics from all the poor performing projects. All right, we talked about certification, distinguishing yourself, and the different professional development opportunities that are out there for you, okay? The one thing I didn't touch upon is really, if you're on the fence about certification, realize aside from increasing your professional development opportunity, it does provide your project teams a common language, which is really important. So everybody is talking the same language, and it really improves how you guys work together. All right? So I'll stop here. That's my spiel. I'd love to see the questions that you guys might have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. This was excellent information. And at this point, we're ready for you to submit your questions. We're going to give you a minute to do that. And while you're doing that, I have some really exciting information for you. As you can see on this slide, the next course coming up on November 9th is the PMI Professional and Business Analysis, and a number of related courses. But here's what's so cool. We are offering a 20% off for attendees of this webinar if you pre-register your classes before the end of this week. I'll repeat that. 20% off the classes that are on this slide if you pre-register for these classes before the end of this week. Secondly, we're offering a buy two, get one free. So that means if you purchase or pre-register 2 courses, you get the third one free, or 2 people, the third person's free. All of the details of this are on our website, and if you have questions about these promotions, you can go to our website or you can email us at info@maxtrain.com. So, just quickly before we take questions, wanted you to be sure you understood that we do have a money-back guarantee. We also have employer insurance. So if you have a MaxTrain employee that leaves your company within 6 months of completing their training at Max, we'll retrain the replacement for free. Also, we have free retakes. If you're taking a class, or you've taken a class, and there is a seat available and you want to retake it, you may do that at no additional cost. So with that, let's take a look at the questions. And one I have here for you, Laura, is what is the difference between a practice guide and a body of knowledge?
Okay, so a practice guide is allowed to get into the how, and it is not a consensus-based standard. While there was a lot of effort made to walk through and take expert input and to have a lot of people come together and read the draft and provide input, it's not done to the extent that a body of knowledge is done, which would be put up for several months for practitioners to comment on over the course of the weeks, and that content then folded into the standard. So the main difference is whether it goes through that process of an exposure draft, a multi-week effort to have the outside world comment on it. And the second thing is in a BOC, it's very, you look at inputs and process and outputs. It's I don't want to say mechanical, but in a way it's mechanical. The practice guide is really practical application, so you can take that book and keep it on your desk, and when you have a problem that you need to solve, you can look it up and say, that's how I would do that. So those are the two main reasons, the differences.
Thank you. Another question I have here is, what is the benefit of obtaining a BA certification from PMI?
Oh, that's a good question. So we saw a couple of it in the application process. First off, if you already have a PMP, it works very nicely, or PGMP, because you don't have to demonstrate the project experience. PMI is a much larger brand. People recognize the name. A lot of organizations over the years have required their PMs to get PMP. I know when I worked in a lot of different director roles managing business analysts, and it was always difficult to get managers to understand, you know, the value of business analysis. But with name recognition now as PMI, they're already approving a lot of this stuff for project managers, and if they already understand that link between success and the link between project failure and not having business analysis, maybe it's an easier sell for an organization to say, hey, we're already connected with PMI, so, you know, there's that brand recognition and recognition in the industry. So those are some benefits. I also think that, you know, it depends on what role you're holding. If you're a BA with a company, so your company's in time will recognize that probably more fuller than other credentials out there. As a consultant, I know clients are really liking it. So I think there's benefit depending on where you're heading in your career.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's a question about accessing this PowerPoint material via the website or offline. In a few days, we're going to be sending a follow-up email to all of our participants today that will have a copy of the PowerPoint, a link to the recording, and all of the classes that we have posted on here that have the 20% off. So you'll have all of that very shortly. And there was another question about the cost of the prep course. Okay, that's been answered via the chat panel. And other Max BA courses. Did we answer Dan's question? Dan, did we answer your question? We just need one moment. Okay, so why would I do a PMI-PBA versus a CBAP? You said the skills are the same and the education is the same. I've heard different views from others. Can you respond to that, Laura?
Okay. I don't know what your the different views that you're hearing, but I know that people like the brand recognition of PMI, and I already spoke to the fact that a lot of organizations are already well connected with PMI for their project managers, so it's an easier transition for orgs to have everybody credentialing through the same organization. From a chapter perspective, I don't know if any of you guys are working with your chapters, attend chapter events. The events, the PMI events are very large, and so at least the ones that I've been to. So it's a great opportunity for BAs and project managers to be able to go to the same events and kind of learn and professionally develop together. So I think there's kind of aligning in that direction is helpful. At the end of the day, you really have to look at that table I provide you in this webinar, and you need to decide, you know, what's important to you, because it isn't one answer for everybody. When I consult with clients, I just give them the facts on both sides as far as the costs and how both of them work. You have to also look at you know, the viability of the credentialing agent, right? You don't want to invest a bunch of time. You want to look at, you know, the strengths of the organizations that provide those credentials and make sure that that's really where you want to invest your time and money. And no consultant or no peer of yours should be telling you, you know, it's this way or that way, because that's, you just are a unique person. You have to look at all of the things around you and the facts on both sides, and figure out which one makes more sense for you. Did
Thank
that
you,
answer your
Laura.
question?
We've got two more
Okay.
questions. Two more questions. Does the certification take into consideration the Agile projects and the BA's roles in those?
The Agile projects are mentioned throughout the Business Analysis Practice Guide. So I can't really speak to what's on the exam, but I can say that, yes, it's important for you to understand how business analysis is performed differently on an Agile project compared to a business analysis project. And those call-outs are done throughout the Business Analysis Practice Guide. So when we talk about planning, we talk about it, you know, the timing of it. It's done very differently in a waterfall predictive project compared to an Agile project. So we highlight those differences. At the end of the day, we know that we have less formality with Agile than we do with traditional projects. It's still business analysis being done. It's just that you may not have the title of business analyst. You might be doing it more often on an Agile project and at different portions in the life cycle on an Agile project, but you're still needing to apply the techniques. You still have to identify your stakeholders, elicit requirements. You might document with pictures on a whiteboard, but you're still going through kind of that same set of tasks. So you should know that, yes.
Laura, last question. Thank you. What other Max BA courses cover PBA skills training?
I'll let you guys talk to that. Are you wanting me to answer that?
Absolutely.
What other Max courses cover PBA training? So if you look at the practice guide, you'll see the domains are spoken about. We talk about needs assessment. We talk about planning for business analysis. We talk about eliciting and documenting, monitoring, traceability. So if you pull out those tasks and you look at those slides that I put in the deck, I didn't speak to them in this webinar, but they're in the deck when you get it. Ask the person that you work with from Max Train as your sales associate, work with them and say, hey, I need to emphasize more on elicitation or writing requirements or validating, and then line up the training that Max Train offers with what it is that you're wanting to target from a professional development. They offer business analysis training. They're going to offer training in those areas. Guarantee it. They're going to now offer the PMI-PBA if you want to go off and get the certification, but your soft skill classes are always there from your REP perspective.
Laura, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody else who has joined us for our session today. I hope you found valuable information that's going to be useful to you. Thanks again, Laura, for a great webinar.
Thank you, guys.